I wanted to introduce you to a tool that I created inside of Photoshop that makes updating your textures and saving out target files really easy. So then that way we can make changes inside of Photoshop, just hit a button and save out either a 24-bit version of our file or a 32-bit version of our file that includes an alpha map, and then just hop on over to Maya and update those textures. So in an earlier video we looked at how we can use Maya, and we could use, they've got texture nodes that is based off of a PSD file. So that works fairly decent. There are some problems. I noticed that it causes Maya to crash every now and then. So some things in here also just have a problem working with that PSD node. So what if you want to use target files, which is the common file format if you're going to be working with like the Unreal Engine or something like that. What we can do is we can use under the Viewport 2.0 settings in here, there's actually a button that reloads all the textures for the scene, and that becomes pretty handy because we can be inside of Photoshop, save out a texture, hop on over to Maya, and then just click this button and it reloads all the textures and shows you the updates to those textures that you've painted. So it's possible to hit this button like this to reload all the textures, but what we could do is open up the script editor right down here, and we could tell it to echo all commands. So I'm just going to erase all the history up top here, click this button to make it real easy to kind of find. So you're going to see it's going to run some different settings here, but really what we're looking for is this AE reload all textures. So we can just grab that whole thing, and if you make a new shelf, I just like to put things on custom shelves, you can go ahead and take just this piece of text, so you just highlight it, and then you can middle mouse drag that up to a shelf and call it, it's a Mel script. So you'll just click Mel like that, and then now if you want to put a little name down here that helps you remember exactly what that thing is, you can go right here to the shelf editor and open that up, and you can see here's like the new one that we've made. I've made one before. So you just click on here and we've got this icon label, and we'll just call this reload text like this. And once we hit tab, you can see it updates here. So it's going to give you a little bit of text here to kind of let you know exactly what that script is up there. Then you hit save all shelves. So now anytime you want to update these textures inside of Maya, you can just come up here to your shelf and click this button and it will reload for you. Alright, now that we know kind of how the pipeline works as far as saving textures and pushing that over to Maya and then updating the textures, let's look at how this tool works and how it saves out the maps. So this extension that I made, it's pretty easy to get to this thing. You can just go to Windows, Extensions, and then after it's been loaded, which I'm going to show you how to install this, it'll show up here and it just becomes another tool that you get to use. So there's three different tabs on this thing. One creates all the layer groups that you see over here, where you can click on, if you click on a layer group called COL, it creates a layer group called COL for color. I'm going to drag this down here because I don't need duplicates of this. So I've made it so it sets up color, norm, spec, emissive, reflectivity, SSS for subsurface scattering, wire for wireframe, and then tight for if you wanted to use a tightness value for specularity, and then alpha if you wanted to make a custom folder for alpha. So the first time you set up a new document, so if we just say file new, and I come over here, let's just say it's a 1024 by 1024 like this. With this new document, we could sit here and click on each one of these buttons and it's going to make that layer group for us. But if you have a new document from the very beginning and you want to create those, you just hit the create all, and it'll create all these different folder groups for you. So it's important that you have all the folder groups. If you don't, when you go to save out, it'll be a problem because the script has to recognize turning on and off these groups that you see here. So what we could do is if we draw something on here, and I'll just put this in a new layer, and I'll start working with just color right now, and we draw something on this. Let's just say this is our black and white map that we have. Okay, just some kind of shape. So if I want to save a color map, I just open up the Save 24-bit targets, which is the one you're probably going to use most of the time. If you want to save as a 32-bit, you open this tab up, and you would need something in the alpha channel like this. So this is what we have for an alpha channel, and this could be something that represents transparency in the game engine or Maya or wherever you're pushing it to, or it could be something that you're packing together in a creative way to get another map stored with the base map. But like I said, I think for the most part you're probably going to be saving out a 24-bit target map. So the other thing is you need a name for this Photoshop document. So I'm going to get Control Shift S, and I'm going to do File, Save As. And then wherever you save this map to, you can see here I've got something for the body and something for the helmet that I was saving out and the spine of this character. Whatever your Photoshop document is named and wherever that's stored at, you need a folder called TGA, and it's going to store all your maps that it's going to export out into this TGA folder. So I'll just call this test like this, hit save. Let me drag this over so you guys can see this. I'm just going to hit OK to the Photoshop format, and then I'll click back over here. Because I'm working with color, let me just make sure we're giving a little bit of color for this demonstration that we have here, like this. So we've got these things here, right? So we got color now. It's pretty darn ugly, but we got color. I'm going to go ahead and click the color 24-bit, and it saves really fast. So even when I'm working with really big, large, layered Photoshop files, it saves out a lot quicker than normally if I had to go and, because normally if you save out a target file, you have to say File, and then let me cancel that real quick. We have to say File, Save As, choose the target file, and then choose where you want to save it at. Then you tell it if it's going to have an alpha channel, that would be the 32-bit thing, and you'd have to give it a name. And it does take a while to write this out, but for whatever reason, saving with this method with these scripts saves out very quickly. So we've got a color map, and if we had a normal map that was just normal maps are generally like this kind of bluish color or something like that. So I'm just going to make a new layer, and I'll fill that with that blue color. So that would be like the normal map, and you could save out a normal map. And then you can see it hides all these other layer groups except for the one that you're saving out, to make sure that when you save these things out, it's only going to save out a normal map or a color map or spec map based off of what you hit. So I can just hit color map, and you can see it switches everything off for you. So it does a pretty good job of doing that and making sure like you're gonna take out any kind of human error that might end up kind of happening with that. And so we'll just hit File, Open, and check out the under this TGA folder. I'm going to go in here and take a look at the files that it kicked out. So here's our two test files, right? So I'll open those, and so here's our normal map that we kicked out and our color map, right? So if we want to save the 32-bit version, when we've got this alpha channel, then we just go to the 30-bit target folder area, and we'll save out color for this one. And then now if we go to open that file back up, that test color, you can see if we go to our channels, it's going to pack in that alpha map for you. So again, this is nothing crazy, it's just it makes it pretty quick to make these maps. So I'm just going to leave this here for just a second. So you can see on this one, the workflow would be if we had a new layer, and I just draw some kind of some mark on this. So we got this, right? And then I don't have to save my PSD, but obviously it would make sense to save that to make sure you're saving all your changes. And then I would just have to go over to the 24-bit target area and hit color like this. And then I'm going to hop on over to Maya, and then I'll use that button that we had to reload the textures. And so you can see here's that new change on the model over here. So it produces a mode of working to where you can work pretty darn quickly. And then obviously I don't want to keep that change, so I'm going to go back over here, and you can just trash this layer. But say you're working with a lot of different files within here. You're working with the the color, and then you want to do some changes to the normal map, the spec. You can, just say you're working on all these, you could click each individual one, but then I also made a big button that exports all these different groups out. So if you wanted to just skip trying to figure out how, if I worked on color and spec and SSS, you could just hit the export all and it's just going to export everything. And then let's just do that. We'll just hit export all and it will run through and save out each one of those map types like that. I don't have anything in the alpha, so that's why it's not showing anything. I can just turn on color, and then we could go back on over to Maya and just hit this reload textures button, and it would take just a little bit. Obviously, the more textures that you update, it might take just a little bit longer for it to refresh over here. But that's basically how you can get this kind of pipeline going. And I'll make this tool available. The other thing I want to show you, so if you're just an artist and you just want this tool and you want to load it up, I'm going to show you that part. But then after that, if you're a little bit interested in how maybe this tool is made, I'll go into that as well. So there are some tools that you need to load this thing. And this is the Adobe Extension Manager, and if you have Adobe installed, I believe you should be able to get this tool. It should be on your computer. If not, I think you can download this thing for free. So when I started looking into this, I think I had to download a few pieces. So it should be pretty easy to find this. So just look for Adobe Extension Manager once that's installed. Then you're going to go to your Adobe product that you want to install the tool for, which this is, in my case, it's Photoshop CS5, and I have the 64-bit version. And then you just have to say File and then Install Extension, and it's going to ask you to navigate to where this thing is. So I've saved it out in a particular area, and the current version that I have is NICZ SaveTGA_version 2. So you just click that and open it, and then you have to install. So Adobe wants you to be a licensed person for making plugins and things like that. Now it is possible for somebody like me, I'm not licensed. You can make the plugin, it's going to give you some warnings saying I think that I'm not licensed or something to that degree. So you can just kind of ignore that and you can install it. But that's why that warning part is coming up. So Photoshop needs to be closed whenever you install the plugin, just to make sure that there's no problems. And then after the plugin's been installed, you should be able to come up here to Window and go to Extensions, and then you should see that there's a new plugin for you to be able to use, and that would be this panel over here. So you might see it show up over here in the toolbar, but you can just open that up and close it like that. So that's how you would install the plugin. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how you could actually create your own, or how this one was created if you're interested in that. So there's a tool called Adobe Configurator, and this is Adobe Configurator 3. I know there's new versions of Photoshop out, so there's CS6. So it says I think that this one works for CS5 and 6, but there might be a new version of this. So you just want to look for Adobe Configurator and get the layest one. So if you want to make a new panel or a new tool, you can just say create panel, and you would give it a name and select the product that you're going to be designing this thing for. And so I would just do, in my case, I'm doing Adobe Photoshop CS5, and we can just call this test like this and hit OK. And so you can see it gives you this this little widget here for controlling like how big is that box going to be inside of Photoshop, that area. And they've got all the different tools within inside of Photoshop, so you could click and drag out, and it's got a grid snapping there if you wanted to do the different selection tools. So you could really design out exactly maybe what you want for this particular piece here, and the different tools that you want to use. So there's different things for tools, there's different things for commands, action, and scripting. And what I actually used was scripts for this. So if you drag out something for a script, and you can change the size of these boxes, which I did, you can come down within here to this area, there's an area for scripts. So you just click this and you can paste whatever text that you want in here that's JavaScript, and it'll run this. So the way I was doing this tool before was you can install scripts on Photoshop, and I was running them as individual scripts, but then I found this tool and found out that you could just actually make buttons, and you can paste your JavaScript directly in here, and then it just loads up as this panel, and you just click the buttons, and it just makes life a lot easier. And then everything you need script-wise is contained within this area. So again, you can tell it like how large these icons are going to be, and you can change the name. You can see, let's see, script. And I don't know if it's within here. This is the menu name, is the test, and this label here I think is where I just called it, like if I wanted to change it to color. But maybe for you want to actually call it out as color. So that's where you can label this thing. And again, the script that you have to actually run it would come right in here like that. And then after I had one set up, it was easy to just copy and then paste that like this. And then you might want to change this to instead of color, let's do like norm or something like that. So that's how I build up the buttons. So saving is pretty easy. If you want to come and say File, Save Panel As, and you could just save it. I'd save this out as a test. This allows you to save the panel, and you can come back at any time and keep working on this thing. But this is just for this tool here. If you want to export this thing out to actually use inside of Photoshop, then there's a little bit more that you have to do. So I actually want to export this panel as a CS extension. You can see it's grayed out. And the reason it's grayed out is if we come over here and we look at the author information, you can see they've highlighted in red. There are some areas that they force you to fill out. So I could just say I'm the author, and I'll just say Nick Z for this. And I'll just click on each one of these things. I think it's just that one area that you really have to worry about. But after that's done, then you're going to say File, Export Panel as CS Extension, and then it comes to this place here. So let's talk about this for a second. You have to have JavaScript installed on your computer, and so you need to find on your computer, you need to browse to where the java.exe sits on your computer. You can see the location where mine sits. You can tell it to export directory, so you can tell it exactly where you want this thing to export out to whenever you're done. And then it also wants this certificate. So this was really confusing for me whenever I first did this, but basically if there's nothing here yet, you just hit this create. And when you hit create, you can say what's your publisher name, and that was, I just made it Nick Z for myself. You also want to say a password, and make sure you write down what that password is, and you have to confirm the password. And then you have to save this .p12, and this was really confusing for me as well. So I think I just saved out this. I was able to save one out, and if there wasn't one there, I think I just created it. So let me see if I can right click on this and open with like a text editor or something. Let me pause this real quick and get that up. So I navigated to where this thing is. I'm just going to right click and say edit with Notepad++, and you can see this is encrypted. So that file, I can't remember if I just made a text file and gave it this extension at the end of that and then pointed it to this, but I did need that file. So I'm going to cancel out of that, and then once it's created, then you want to point to where that file is that you created. And I can't really remember if it was just a matter of me saying I'm going to browse to where I want to save this thing out at, and I think that's what it was. You could say exactly what you want it to be. So this is test P12, save. I might as well just go through this real quick. So you give yourself an author name, and you give yourself a passcode. I'll just call that test right now. like this, and I think this is, you could create, and it makes that file for you. And then now this is saying where it's going to be pushed out at. This should be pointing to this P12 file that we just made, and then you need your password, which is, for me, test, and then we hit export, right? And so it'll tell you that if it made it correctly, hit OK, and then we can go ahead and come on over to this panel, and it should save this thing out as this test and ZXP. So this is the file that you need whenever you use the Adobe Extension Manager. So after that's installed, I just type in my start menu, Extension Manager, and then you can load that up. Okay, we're loading that, and while that loads up, it's basically going to go to Photoshop CS5, and then I'm going to go ahead and say File, Install, and Extension, and I want this test ZXP for that, and accept. And this is where I was telling you that I'm not a licensed publisher, and so they want to caution you against that. So I'll just hit install and hit OK, like this. Now Photoshop was open, so I don't think that's going to show up, but we can go ahead and close down Photoshop, reopen it like that, and we'll open Photoshop back up. I'll just make a new document like this, just so we have a document, and then go to our extension, and you can see here's test. So here's that new panel that we just made. Obviously when I click these things, there was no script for this part, so it doesn't do anything, but you can see these tools work for this. So if I want the different selection types on here, if I want to use the gradient tool, I could use that. Okay, like this. So these tools work. So this is basically how this was set up. Now I could show you guys, for those that are interested, just a little bit about the script. So like I was saying, after you save this thing out, you can open a panel that you've worked on. So this is my version 2 of this tool, and I also used these tab kind of groups, this accordion panel thing that you see here. So you see there's containers that you can build as well. So this is this accordion thing, and this just gives you a panel like this that you can click through. So I had my create layer groups on there, my save 24-bit and save 32-bit like this. And if we click on one of these, you can actually see, if we scroll down here to the script area, I'm going to open this up, and the window might be pretty small, but you can expand it, and you can just basically copy and paste this into a text editor or something like that. So I'm not a scripter. I am very good, I guess, at taking other people's stuff and kind of going, oh, okay, I think I see what they've done, and just hacking it together to get it to do what I'm looking for. So that's basically how I created it. If you know scripting, you might be looking at whatever I've done and laughing. But basically this original script was done by Waylon Brink, I believe his name is. That was his script, and I think the original one was to save out JPEG files or something to that effect, but I wanted to turn it into target files, and then I had to find other people's code to turn on and off the layers. So these are the commands to actually turn the visibility of those layer sets on or off, and I had to set this per button to make sure everything was off except for the one that we're saving out, which would be color. So you can see the visibility is true for color, and it's set false for everything else. And then it basically looks through and it takes a look at whatever your Photoshop name is, and then it puts the underscore extension .col.tga at the end of there, and then it sets the export options to Targa. And here's where it says, if it's going to save out 24-bit or 32-bit. So the only thing that's really different about these scripts for the 24-bit and 32-bit version is this part right here where it says 24 and the other one says 32. And the other one says save options for alpha channel. This one's set to false because it's 24-bit, 32-bit is set to true. Saving the current document. Yeah, so this is saying where it builds out the path. So I currently have it set to wherever the Photoshop document is, it adds this TGA to it. So that's why it's real important that wherever you save your Photoshop file, you have to have that folder called TGA because it looks for this extension. So if you wanted to get rid of that, I think you could take away this TGA part and you could make it something custom if you wanted it to say what you wanted it to do. If I knew more about scripting, I would have the script be smart enough to know if that TGA folder was there, and if it's not there, then maybe it could create it somehow. But again, that's beyond my scope. So that's basically how these things work for saving out the different pieces. Now the creating of layer groups is a little bit different. So if we look at the script for that, these are the options that I found for actually making that layer group if it doesn't exist. So I think it basically creates a group and then it adds the name to it. So again, this is me just kind of taking code that I found and hacking it together. So if you see this code and you know anything about code, you might have a much easier way that's maybe just 1 line or 2 line. I'm not really sure. But that's basically how it's done to create the layer groups. And the create all one is a little bit different. I think it just takes every one of those pieces that I made and it goes through and creates them all at one time. Now again, if I was smarter with my scripting and I knew what I was doing, the thing that I'd like to do is push it to see, is there already a layer group there that exists? And if you hit the create all, it doesn't create it, and it just goes, okay, there it already exists, so I'm going to skip over that part and still create the rest of the pieces that you need. So that's basically how I built this thing, how I saved it out, how you can load it again, and then how you can set up the certificate part to where you can export this thing out and then load that as an extension inside of Photoshop. So I'll make this available and make this to where people can download the version of mine if you want it. If you're just an artist and you don't really care about making your own version, then feel free to do that. But if you're somebody that's looking to create your own, then I'll try to provide the pieces that I use to make mine as well. The only thing is I'm using Photoshop CS5, and I believe some of these tools have changed for CS6. So if you're on CS6, you might have to get the latest version of Adobe Configurator and some of the other things on there as well. And I'm not sure if the CS5 version works in CS6, so if you'd have to try it out if you have CS6.